Okay, so we're running late, and I'm sure people's stomachs are starting to grumble. Hopefully, you'll be patient and interested in this very exciting panel. My name is Rita Soni. I'm with NASCOM Foundation, and I think most of yesterday and most of today has been focused quite a bit on higher education and formal school education. We're going to focus on this panel to talk about the total of 500 million people that need to be trained, and a huge chunk of those in vocational training. And I have a very eminent panel. I'm not going to give too many introductions. Hopefully everyone has read their conference materials. But this is going to be more of a conversation. We will have time at the end to ask questions, but if there are some burning questions that come up as we're having this conversation, I think we can probably pass around a microphone. I'd like to start with Dilip Chenoy. His institution, NSDC, has the responsibility of training 150 million of those 500 million people that we're talking about in the sector, and that is by 2022. So Dilip, can you start us off by giving a sense of where we're at in terms of getting to 150 million? What's been working, what hasn't been working, and just a quick lay of the land.
Thanks. Thank you, Rita. Am I audible now or not yet? Okay, hello. I think. Yeah. Thank you, Rita. I need to just step back and say that in 2008, when we came up with this plan of skilling 500 million people by 2022, the number was very simple. By 2022, we will have about 700 to 800 million people in the working age population. If the higher education space gets all its reform right, we will have 200 million of them graduates. The question was, what would these other 500 million people have? And when we got into a room and we reviewed, every ministry said that, industry, you are not correct. Textiles ministry was training people, the heavy industry ministry was training people. About 23 ministries were training people. And interestingly, when we added up all the numbers, and it was added up by the late Professor C.K. Prahlad, he found that the total skilling capacity in the country was 3.1 million. So there's no way with 3.1 million capacity we're going to get 500 million people skilled. So we're going to take 3.1 million to 500 million. And to 50 million or 60 million to be able to do 500 million by 2022. Over the last few years, the 3.1 2 years ago went to around 4 million. Last year we did 5.1 million. And this year, if all goes well, by 31st of March, it should be 8 million. And the next year would be a bit more. Now, the numbers don't say everything. The other challenge was that what skills do these people possess and who is certifying them, and what needs to be done. And the government said that, okay, you don't want to hear industry, and Rita, sorry, but NASCOM saying we can only hire 25% of the engineers that come out of the system. Why doesn't industry actually form sectoral groups, set the standards, assess people and certify people going forward and be a partner in this progress? So as of now, 28 sector skill councils have been formed. On the 27th of December, the National Skills Qualification Framework was announced, where we are trying to align all the skill development efforts across different ministries, across different shades of private sector to a common outcome and a recognized outcome. And the third was that the aspiration for young people to get into skill was lacking, because the skill certificate was not preferred. A person preferred a degree without a job rather than a job without a degree. So in the last budget, there was a famous para 113 where the government said to voluntarily encourage children to take up skill development. The government would give a monetary reward to any young person who goes to an authorized training center, takes a test, takes a course, passes a test and gets a certificate by the Sector Skill Council. And this was launched on August 16th. As of this morning, when you check the website, we had 134,000 people enrolled in close to 2,200 centers across the country. And by September 14th, we should get to 1 million. So this is also tomorrow, 11 o'clock, Doordarshan. For the first time in the history of India, you have a reality show called Hunarbaz, where we're going to have skill competitions actually on tailoring, on haircutting, on IT, software, from range, auto, mechanics. So we are trying to actually excite the young people to do that. And to help entrepreneurs, because we have to take the capacity from 3.1 million to 50 million, to help entrepreneurs to set up skill development centers. We have been running a business plan competition. TIE and Innovent are partners there. And this year, the finals are on the 18th of March. We've got 1,054 entries of young people wanting to set up scalable, sustainable skill development initiatives. So first, there's alignment through the Cabinet Committee on Skill Development, the National Skill Development Agency, across the different ministries, the states and NSDC. Second, we are helping aspirations. Third, we are ensuring the appropriateness of skill training for industry today, tomorrow, and day after. We're getting the employers to set the standards, assess, and take it forward. And finally, getting a whole system which a person can accumulate credits and move between the vocational space and the educational space and vice versa.
That's an incredible array of activities that are building this ecosystem that will eventually get us to 500 million, or at least the 150 that's been discussed. Speaking about one component of that, which is the skilling institutions, I'd like to turn to Mahendra, who has a very interesting background and very interesting experiences, particularly with the Tatas and then later higher education at Harvard, where you started to explore this space of skilling. I'd like you to share with the audience a bit more about the skilling institution that you've created and are running with CMC in partnership with TCS.
Thanks, Rita. I just want to share two stories, real-time stories. About 12 years back, I inherited two of the worst companies of Tata Group, almost 6 companies. And the message to the whole system was that company would be closed. Imagine my jumping into that environment as a chief executive, what would happen in a place like Jamshedpur, where I can't even get a talent out to work for us. The only solution which we could use was training these 4,000 workers and 600 engineers by our own system. And I'm happy to share that in 3 years, these very companies became world-class companies, and Tata's now. Let me tell you further, in 2008, when almost all engineering companies in the country lost in the third quarter because of financial debacle, but I was the only company out of 164 engineering companies who still made profit. So that is one example where we could train our people. I made 2 academies there, one for Excel, one for transmission. We developed about 70 faculties, and internal training was done. In the process, I did call McKinsey and other people also to help us out, but we couldn't go through that because it was too expensive for me. So we did our own. The second thing, like Dilip just mentioned about the areas, sector skills, the highest growth expected besides IT would be probably next is infrastructure. 6 months back, we started a program. The New Zealand University taking their help because they're experts in that, a construction management program in Hyderabad. And believe me that in 3 weeks of hard work, we could achieve the first 1 batch to start the work there. Even the cost of 2 lakh rupees, we had about 40 students coming in. Because what I did was that trying to marry the industry, brought in some builders and infrastructure people, about 15 institutes together, and put them together, gave them pitch, and tried to work on it. These 2 things I would like to share. And just, there is a fashion here, believe me, the last 5 years I've been going to several conferences, a fashion of talking about demographic dividend, fashion of talking about India's competitive index, etc. But if we need to take advantage of this demographic dividend, then we need to think of what next economy would be, 21st century economy. And to do that, unless we train our people with 21st century education skill, which is not so much as what we have been doing earlier, but people have to be innovative, thinkers, difficult situations, creativity, entrepreneurship, leadership. Now, coming to vocational education, it's not that only higher education requires these qualities. Today, because job market is shrinking gradually, we need to train even the 10th standard boy to become entrepreneur. At least he can think.
And
I'm
grow.
sure that in few weeks or few years from now, there'll be a lot of people working as freelance in the country.
Hopefully 50% of them are girls too.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. So actually that leads us to a really interesting conversation we were having outside just before coming in here. Panch, you talked about how it is that we need to start thinking about the innovation economy and a lot of what Mahendra was just talking about in terms of 21st education. Without getting into the semantics of vocational training as a term or whatever term we want to use, can you share with the group a little bit more of your thinking and experience in terms of how is it that we convert our current thinking in vocational training, in community college, and the outside of the formal education system to take into account this 21st century innovation economy?
Thank you, Rita. So I just wanted to, I agree with my fellow panelists here on some of the observations. I asked the fundamental questions. Who are we training for? What are we training for? And how are we training? So the first question is, who are we training for? Are we training for the current economy or the economy of the past? Let's train more software engineers because we will have the software engineering jobs forever. Or are we going to think about what the future economy is going to look like and then start to work with a focus on a certain set, as sectors was mentioned here, certain set of sectors in a very focused manner? That then leads to the next question, what are we training for? And what are we training for, again, is not the same what we trained for in the past, where the emphasis was on disciplinary skill sets. If you were an automobile engineer, that's what you did for 30 to 40 years of your life and you retired in that job. It would be surprising if you changed even a company or two along the way that you worked for. But that's not what the future is looking like. So if that is the case, what are you training for is very different. One of the fundamental skill sets that you need to inculcate, it doesn't matter whether it's higher education or vocational training. In fact, I would argue that the vocational training folks have to have this even more, the concept of learning to learn. What does it mean? How do you adapt? How are you agile? And some of the terms were mentioned here. How are you creative, entrepreneurial? It is not about entrepreneurship necessarily, as good as they are, and I really appreciate the fact that Ty and others are helping build entrepreneurial skills. But that's focused on entrepreneurship. What we need is whether you work for a company, whether you start your own company, whatever you do in your life, you ought to think entrepreneurially. Now, how do you have those kinds of what's as part of the training process? And I can tell you that any disciplinary training alone, however good it is not going to be good enough. People have to think across disciplines if they have to be successful in the future. And so whether it's vocational or higher education, we have to have that what covered. And then comes the how. And the how captures the scalability aspect. We have to, if you have to train 150 million people or 500 million people, are we going to do it the traditional way, where people go to the bricks and mortars and get trained? Or is it going to be a very different kind of a training process? So this is something that have to be rethought, in my humble opinion. All these three are extremely important. Otherwise, we'll be reacting rather than being proactive. We would be in the current economy rather than the future economy. And so that's what I think is exceedingly important as you're thinking about scale, because the immediate reaction is, how do I rapidly multiply what I'm doing and see how I can get more colleges, more people, as challenging as it is to get faculty trained, which was something that we were discussing earlier. These are fundamental questions that need to be asked. And trying to replicate something that happened somewhere else doesn't make sense. It is an opportunity to recreate, reinvent, reimagine, and reconceptualize. And that is something that I would suggest that is also embarked upon. If it is done already, that is great, but that is done with as much vigor as trying to train many, many, many people for the future.
Great. Great.
Thank you, Rita.
Dilip, I think it'd be great if you could step in here and especially answer the how question, the brick and mortar, and we have so many different training models in India. We have ITIs, we have some community colleges, we have the traditional vocational training. We've started to introduce vocational training into schools through a lot of what's happening through the sector skills councils. What is the sort of silver bullet on the how?
Okay. This is a very fascinating question, and the conclusion that NSDC came to was that we don't know the answer. Okay? And then we said, who knows the answer? We said the employer who is looking for a person to be employed today, tomorrow, or day after knows the answer to that question. So how do we empower the employer to be able to determine and influence what training is given today and how training is delivered today? And what standards do people want to train to? See, traditionally the education system, whether it's the K-12 or whether it's the the undergraduate or the postgraduate, has determined what they need to teach, when they need to teach. Come April, the exams are there. We will give you the questions. You got to answer it the way we want to, otherwise you're not going to pass, right? Now, this is not going to work in the world of work. The distance between the world of work and the world of education is very rapidly increasing. And traditional and purist educationists say that it's not the business of education to teach people to be ready for jobs. And when you ask the students, why have you joined the education institution, be it MBA, engineering, we want a job. So there's a huge disconnect there. So what we said was, okay, for those people who want to learn a skill, get certified by the employer, and get a job at the end of it, we are providing you an avenue, right? So the existing 3.1 million have to go to 50 million, right? So we said we'll create this new system by which we will have private sector entrepreneurs coming and working on creating shared value, not CSR, not grants, not aid, because if we can create the value of a skill certificate, that if I am an underprivileged youth in Jharkhand and I understand that if I go and take a training program, I will get a certificate and I will get a job in Mr. Bapna's ex company, then I will be willing to pay for it. Nobody needs to give it to me for free. Today, the value of the skill certificate has been diminished because we said it should be free, it is CSR, and please come, please learn, and this is going to empower you. So we made it into an entitlement rather than empowerment. So the first thing we're doing is getting the employer to have the leadership in defining what needs to be done. Second, we are empowering the young people to make careers and lifelong ability. The third is that today I want a person to work in my company as a driver and I have an Indica, okay? I don't want a person who's been trained to drive a Mercedes-Benz and who's expecting a salary of 20, 30, 40,000 rupees to drive that car for me. So I'm willing to go and have a person to drive an Indica for me. Tomorrow as I graduate, then I can send him learn the next higher car, and incremental learning and lifelong learning, so he learns how to move with the time. This opportunity was not available because he did not have a certificate saying he's authorized to drive an Indica. So we are using technology to scale. Right? We have a skill development management database. We have a certificate which is issued online. The sector skill councils are going to have a directory of skilled people with what skill levels are there. As you add, this is going to add to your thing. So the second thing is, how do you actually keep a lifelong learning going forward and enabling the person to grow? And it's not a skill, it's not a vocation, it's a career. And then we have to actually move from hours and credits to outcomes. It doesn't matter to me if you have to, be packaging this bottle of water. It doesn't matter to me whether you've learned it, attended it 3 hours, 300 hours, X number of classes, but do you have the ability to do this? And I keep telling people, how does skill differ from education, right? Now, many of us in this room are wearing shirts, right? So you have 8 buttons, or let's take 10 buttons, just for simplicity. I'm a fantastic tailor. I'm 60% accurate. 6 of the buttons are aligned, 4 are out of line. Will you buy that shirt? You won't. You have to get 10 buttons right. millions of time, in ppm, but an engineer can pass at 68%, a welder can never pass at 67, he has to be 100%. So we're saying outcomes. So if a person has outcomes and he demonstrates outcomes, the outcomes added, and then you can aggregate outcomes and then be equivalent to a BA degree or this thing. So this whole thing is what we are trying to change, and those companies in India that are first identifying what jobs are available, what are the competencies that the employers want, get their training material validated by them, get those people to send assessors and assess and certify those people through the Sector Skill Council, are making money. They're running at extra capacity. They're growing exponentially. I have one person from Bangalore. In fact, I have my first 6 partners, Rita, since you mentioned the gender thing under the radar. The first 6 NSDC partners from Bangalore are all women, right? And Gayatri trains carpenters and construction workers. She gave in a proposal to train 10,000 people a year. She's already doing 40,000. Next board meeting, we're going to give her additional funding. So, and she's making money. At the end of this year, she wants to be a 100 crore organization. Gram Tarang, similarly training people in left-wing extremist districts of Orissa and Andhra Pradesh, doing well, making money. ILNFS, 100 multi-skill schools across the country. The NSDC board has approved 112 partners. 70 are operational. 2 years ago, they trained 185,000 people. Last year, they trained 400,000 people. This year, they'll train 1 million. The first million for NSDC took 4 years. The second million will take 6 months, and the third million will take 4 months. And then eventually, we'll be doing 1 million a month, going to 2 million a month. I mean, that's the rate at the thing that we have to grow exponentially, and it cannot be done if you're not aligned to the employers and to the job on hand, whether it is the cameraman or the sound person. Today they don't have certificates. Some of them have come from FTTI, but others would have not. So can we say something that they hang in? I am a certified cameraman level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. My level 7 is equal to a bachelor's degree. Okay?
That's great. Pulling together the entire ecosystem, tying it to the actual jobs. But one thing that you said about educationists, I remember being in a room full of educationists and saying to them, standing up and saying, they were talking about this divide between employers and their students. And I stood up and said, I am born and raised in the US. I have been working since I was 16. I worked throughout college, and I said, the reason I got a job, and I got a great job at GE, was because I had been working all along. So I told all of those educationists in the room that I think the best teacher for all of their students is a boss. And they all did not like that answer. But I think, sir, you've had a different experience. You've done a survey, a paradox of higher education, and you just released this survey with vice chancellors. Can you tell us a little bit about some of that
a bit of a
survey
passionate
finding?
story. Before that, let me just give a small compliment to Dilip. And I want to support on one part. He mentioned about the freedom of the industry to certify. And a great example I have with me, just a year back when we started the training program in CMC, and we found difficulty in getting right faculty around. Roughly, by the way, today we train about 40,000 people there. All we did was that the faculty has to be certified by the industry people, which means a faculty must be certified by TCS next door. At least easy for us to do that. They said, whomsoever we train, unless the faculty is certified by TCS, you are not going to be teaching people. And that worked very well. Just let me tell you about, we did a paradox survey about 10 days back. We approached about 150 vice chancellors directly, and 67 responded. I'll just give 2 results out of it. By the way, first of all, 66% of the institutes have less than 1,000 students. They call university. By the way, some of the universities have only 7 students. But in India, we have 1,000 students in one university. 72% indicated that the growth they expect is less than 20%. Imagine the market size is 1.3 million people, sorry, 130 million people to be educated, and here people say that our growth is going to be 10%, which should be 20 times, not 20%. Where is the mismatch? A big issue. The third thing which they mentioned was faculty engagement, very poor. And the last thing which they mentioned is that out of 67 people who responded, there was a question called, what are your 3 pain points? And these 3 pain points, 67 people repeated 123 times, saying that we have pain point of faculty, pain point of students not getting interested to learn. It brings to a table that how do we scale then? The issue is the faculty, issue is the students, how do we scale? And I find that what Punch has a great idea, and I have been also working on it. The only way is to have blended education and also involve in education besides the core part, that is T what he mentioned, besides the core competency, some competency on innovation, entrepreneurship, thinking about it, creativity, involve that. That's what we're spreading here.
Seems like a catch-22. If faculty is a challenge, then attracting students will be a challenge, and then it's going to be hard to attract faculty. Great. I think we have a little bit more time. We have 5 minutes, okay. I'd like to start getting everyone thinking about questions, but I'd like to come back to Bunch on one last topic that we spoke of. Someone, I think you said, we're going to have software jobs forever. I'm not sure about that. We talked outside about this issue of reshoring. So if we can circle back to 21st economy, potential of reshoring, having downturns in the economy elsewhere where they start thinking about these issues, how much more can we do in India to prepare for all of these eventualities?
So I think the fundamental thing that the learning to learn, because the economy will change, it will sometimes change dramatically. So when you talk about skill sets, the fundamental skill sets are more the soft skill sets, as it is termed as soft, but I would term them as, they're probably the hard skill sets to have. The soft skills are probably the disciplinary skill sets. So I think when you're educating, you need to rethink how you're educating people. The other thing that I wanted to sort of, if I can take a minute on Bapna's follow-on to faculty, if I could. I think we are still thinking in the age-old way of teaching and learning in the lectern pedagogical sense, where there is the sage who's professing to people about how you should learn and what you should learn and so on. That train is leaving the station or already left the station, folks. If you look at your children, at least I can speak for my children, they are learning from this all the time. They are in their social networks, the peer learning, the aspirational peer learning, and combined with some learning that happens in the pedagogical, truest pedagogical sense, it's a very different world out there. So we need to think about this faculty stuff in a very different way. If we think that now we need to have 10,000 faculty, we had 100, and the faculty are doing the same things as before, that's not going to produce what we need. So I'll stop there.
Great. So do we have any questions in the audience? Great. Very fast hand. Go for it. Sure. Or she.
He or she is tracking your promotions year on year. And now actually I would like to redirect it to Mr. Chenoy. That sir, does NSDC having the power also tracking that the certificate that the person is getting is not only helping him to get a multiple of X salary, but how is he actually performing about 2 years down the line or 5 years down the line? Because that's the main idea. Has he actually grown in life after taking the certification?
At this point of time, we are not tracking 2 years down the line or 3 years down the line. We're only tracking 6 years to 1 year because we are a very relatively new organization. And this is a debate that we're having is, do we need to track it? Okay? Or can we find another metric to track what it is? The challenge in India is a majority of the jobs are entry-level jobs. And the way industry is structured in India, they only pay minimum wages for all entry-level jobs. Some of the entrepreneurs, if they had their way, they would pay even below the minimum wage, right? And the bigger challenge for us is actually getting the employer and industry to recognize the value of skill. So what we are focusing on Energies now is to look at productivity levels of a person who's been skilled and a person who's not been skilled, and communicating that to the employer, because that is what will bring out a wage differential. What we have managed to do in the very short term that this scheme, or that we've been operational with the sector skill councils, is that Kishore Biani, Mr. Raghupati Singhania, Mamen, and other people, CEOs, have written letters in Mr. Kishore Biani's Monday musings to everybody. Given the choice, if you have a sector skill council certified person and an uncertified person, thou shalt hire the sector skill council certified person, right? The second thing is, we are now trying to say, okay, give him a 10% or 15% increase, right? What we're saying is, if you hire a sector skill council, pay a 1 month's placement fee, and if the person stays with you for 6 months or 8 months, can you refund the training fee? So we're finding other non-monetary impacting things to the company for them to recognize this. And as soon as they start recognizing that, they will start to pay more. But the danger is then that the industry would want to say, okay, in this batch, who are the top 3? I'm only going to record the top 3. And we're saying we're not going to give marks, we're going to say pass or fail. Right? So we have to change the mindset in industry for this to succeed. It is not only the young person who is there. It's us. You want a plumber at home. If he says, I'm going to charge you 1,000 rupees a day, the first thing you'll say, no, but the daily rate is 300 rupees. I won't pay you more than 300. You get into negotiation. I do. Others do. But we've got to change that mindset. We've got to begin with self. We've got to recognize skill. We've got to understand the value of skill. That's what will change. The rest will follow.
Okay.
Thank you. Jerry Halton from New York University. As I listen to all the great things you're doing, it is clear you've made some major moves forward. It would seem to me one of the critical elements is the number of teachers or faculty to meet this increasing both demand opportunity. So could you say a little bit about how you view essentially the skills improvement so we have enough teachers and faculty members to meet the high level of students that should show up in this marketplace you described?
Yeah, thank you very much. We asked the question slightly different. We said, how can you take a best teacher who is currently confined to 20 students to 2 million students? Is there a model that is working in India? And guess what? We found 5 models. There's a small town called Kota. I don't know how many people know it, right? But they specialize in training kids for entering the IIT entrance exam, right? And some of the best schools there have VSAT based teaching classes where the one professor in Kota, he's got a physical class there, he's training many other people, right? Similarly, we found for banking, right? We found NIIT was doing it in their synchronous learning systems otherwise. So then we found what is the barrier. The barrier is a lot of, programs say you need to have this teacher-student ratio, you can't use this, etc. Then we said, the bigger challenge is that industry does not trust the certification. So after a college or this thing, they have their own entrance test. So we said, what if we made the assessments online? And we took a very interesting thing. We said, we are training a banana planter, right? A banana farmer. How can you do the assessment of the banana farmer online? How can you do the assessment of the construction worker online? We have 8,000 of one and 1,500 of the other. So we are getting the assessments online, and then we are teaching the people how to do the assessments, and we're building a process. So we are following the process and getting technology interventions in so that I don't need a third-party auditor or a fourth-party auditor. The whole system is transparent and open, and you decide for yourself. And the biggest challenge we are facing is that we yet do not have one institute in India which has come to me and asked me for funds. Hey, there's a shortage of trainers. I'm going to train the trainers and going to place them, right? Nobody has come. And I'm not pushing one because I'm saying when the people find the business model and find how they will create shared value, we'll address that. Till then, we will just keep pushing the envelope. And I tell industry that the best trainers are on your laptop. Oh, we're not looking at technology. I said, hey. Retirement age for a teacher is 65. The guy retires at 58 in your company. So that supervisor, that lady or the person who's a supervisor who taught people on the shop floor, today could be an excellent teacher back on his village and earn more in addition to his pension. It's a dot-com opportunity. That's how we run this.
I think there's one more. We have time for one more question. Last question.
Yeah, hi. My name is Pramod Joshi, and I play the role of an advisor to a few universities, and I've also helped start up a couple of universities and institutions. My experience has raised one thought in my mind. I think India is divided into two compartments. And it is not the haves and have-nots, it is not the rural versus urban or the gender divide. I think there are hungry people and there are not hungry people. And I'll explain what I mean. I don't mean physical hunger. You try to train somebody who thinks he does not need training and the training falls flat. I've seen people in rural India, poor India, who are very hungry to learn. And then I've seen people, again in rural India, who don't want to learn, come what may. Is there a way, I'm asking the panelists, is there a way we can run a psychometric test or something that tells us, okay, let's not waste money on people who are not hungry to learn. If we can only put all our scarce resources in feeding the hunger of those who want to learn, rather than try and train and teach everybody, we might have a solution.
So I will take a stab at it in the following sense. I would ask the fundamental question, why are they not hungry? So that is more important to address in my view rather than doing this bifurcation. Because if you have a not hungry person still a citizen of the country, then you are going to have problems as you move this forward. So the not hungry part to me is lack of motivation or inspiration. So I would suggest that you address that problem of motivation and inspiration and see how you can get them to get more excited to learn something. Okay? This is a challenge everywhere, and it has to be addressed, because if you don't address that, the other three things that you talked about, haves, have-nots, will be an outcome of that. Okay.
Okay, so Prabal, I actually want to give a live example. Amrita University developed a program to teach plumbing using haptics. Haptics is, for those who don't, very high-end computer simulation tool. It's an interface where you could be doing this, but it'll actually show, are you sawing a metal pipe correctly or incorrectly? So they went around the local neighborhood and said, we want to train plumbers. How many want to join? 0. Nobody wanted to join. Then they said, we want to teach you how to repair a thing using IT and using the computer. They had a queue, right? And then when they got inside the room and they said, we're learning plumbing through this, they had 20 women join. 20 women joined the program, 17 graduated, 3 did not. And said, something's wrong somewhere. And these 17 women suddenly started, earning money. 3 weeks later, those 3 women came and said, can we come and join? So I said, no, you have to get a batch of 20. Those 3 women went and got 48 people, convinced them to come and join, and they wanted to come and do this. So I think we just have to demonstrate that there's a lot of people, one of the biggest challenges, you're right, hungry, not hungry. People in the village, or even a lot of urban young people, are not geared to working 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, coming at 9 a.m. Doesn't make a sense to them, because the agriculture economy doesn't need that. So it is not a skilling issue. It is a social engineering problem, which as a society we need to actually tackle. And we need to have information that, hey, being a disc jockey is as good as being a computer scientist or being a plumber and a security person. We gave away 300 certificates on the 5th to people. Who were there? Plumbers, security people. Now the security people were there to actually get certificates. So they sat in the FICCI auditorium on the chairs with all the other business people. When that guy came up to address and the finance minister was giving up the certificate, he said, I have never had the opportunity to sit on the same chair in the same auditorium as CEOs are sitting. If we don't change that attitude, no matter what we do, the best trainers, the best skill development institutes, the highest salary, we're not going to address this issue.
Great. I think there's probably a lot of other questions, but I think we need to wrap up since we're running late. I'd like to thank the panelists, especially ending on such a high note of transforming this nation, not just by skilling, but really changing mindsets and finding the hunger in all of these young people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita, Dilip, Panch, and Mr. Bapna. Really appreciate your time today. We'll move on to another really interesting session. This one is titled Innovations in K-12 Education Delivery Models.